Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar with XR and Learning. I'm Hester Tinti-Kane. I am the Chief Customer Officer for XR and Learning, and I will introduce our guest, Cody House, in just a moment. So this webinar today is on immersive learning in police science and security studies. This is an informal case study shared directly by Cody. So thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And this is Cody. He's the Director of Online Learning and Instructional Technology at George Washington University. He has an amazing background. And the most recent thing he's working on is he's a second-year doctoral student in education at George Washington University. So welcome, Cody.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So let's move on to the next slide here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our organization. So you can see generally how we got to XR. So VR, AR, MR, it's all XR. It all falls under that umbrella. X is the X factor when it comes to reality. And XR and Learning accelerates awareness and adoption of virtual, augmented, and mixed realities in education and learning. And when we say education and learning, we mean really any time throughout the entire learning life cycle, whether it's pre-kindergarten to 12, whether it is higher education, or whether it is professional learning that might happen as workforce training or corporate learning and development. So we look at learning in a very broad way, but today we are focused on higher education. So this is the second in a series of webinars, and they're all exploring these transformative technologies and how these innovative leaders like Cody are using them effectively with all different ages of learners. So what we're going to start with now is a poll. Ask a couple of questions about your professional background, your goals for attending this webinar, and your use of XR. So pardon me as I jump out of my slides and I launch the first poll. Okay, so the majority of folks are in higher education. That's 67%. 67% also want to hear about your pilot, and 83% are using XR in their organization. So thanks very much for responding to that poll, and hopefully, Cody, this gives you a little bit of a context for who we're talking to today.
It certainly does. Thank you all very much for responding to that.
Awesome. Great. Okay. So now I'm going to go back to the slides. All right, Cody. So I know I did an abbreviated version of your bio there because I don't happen to have it on hand, but if you wanted to add anything about your personal background, why don't you go ahead and do that before we get started with your presentation? Thanks.
Yeah, and I certainly will, and I appreciate everyone being here today and attending this, but while I'm going through my presentation, I noticed a lot of you are currently using XR and technologies of that variety in your institutions. If you would, in the chat window, share a little bit about kind of what you're working on, and we'll kind of revisit some of those as we move through the webinar. And then at the end, when we work with the discussion, that'll help kind of get that conversation fueled, and we'll have a better understanding of how people are currently using some of this technology. So as Hester said, I'm Cody House. I'm the Director of Online Learning and Instructional Technology at George Washington University. So I specifically am the director of the College of Professional Studies, or I work for the College of Professional Studies at GW. And so it's a smaller program within the university as a whole, located in Washington, DC, where I spend a lot of my time working on emerging technologies and focusing on innovative ways that we can bring new technologies and enhance curriculum for the students that are enrolled in our program, which are, throughout most of our programs, are predominantly adult learners, but a majority of the programs that we offer are master's degrees or bachelor completions, which kind of fall into that same bucket of adult learners that are coming back to complete their degrees. And so, Hester, I'll go ahead and have you move to the next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, but more in relation to what program we actually were using this virtual crime scene. And I'll get to the nuts and bolts of the virtual crime scene itself. But first, I want to set the context a little bit and give you an idea of what kind of program I was working in, and give you an idea of what kind of parameters I had to understand and comprehend as I was sitting down to design this program. So as I mentioned, within the College of Professional Studies, the program that I actually worked on was a bachelor's completion degree, which is the Police and Security Studies program. And a majority of the students in the program itself are law enforcement, whether that is they are active police officers, they work for their rangers, or some of them work in other law enforcement related professions, meaning they might be security guards at a government agency, or they're security guard for a museum. There's a wide range of jobs that these students coming into this program are employed with. And their reason for coming back for this degree has a wide range of outcomes. And so keeping that in mind when we were developing this project was really important, because not all students understood what a crime scene was. Not all students understand what virtual crimes are or computer crimes. Not all these students understand how to use technology entirely, because of many of them are either in their 20s or their 30s, and we have students that are all the way up into their 60s and their 70s. And so we have people from a wide range of age ranges. And one of the other big challenges that we faced when we were designing this program is the hybrid format that this program came to be developed as. So originally the content was supposed to be developed for both a face-to-face and an online track, but shortly before the program launched into the online format, we had to condense the curriculum together into one track. And so we had a weird Frankenstein of a hybrid format where we had some students in the program were face-to-face, that they would come sit in the class and engage with the professor. Some students would join in those live discussions via WebEx. And then we would also have a third bucket of students that were entirely asynchronous and did not attend those WebEx sessions. And so we had students that were a wide range of technical skills, a wide range of availability. We had to deal with the time zone struggles that many online programs can struggle with students being in other countries, students being on the West Coast. Since we're located in the East Coast, building in that 3-hour time difference can be a struggle sometimes when you're building in assignments. And that's not even thinking about students that are international and the time zone differences that you have to address with that. So Hester, next slide, please. All right, so obviously we have this great virtual reality crime scene that I'm going to talk a little bit about. But one result of this project that I have struggled with since the day I finished it and the day I started sharing it out with people is that, and I'm sure many of you out there that are working on these projects at your own institutions, you've struggled with, is that people, meaning program directors, instructors, or third parties outside of your purview, come to you and they say, I love your virtual crime scene. I want to do that in my paralegal studies program. I want to do that in my sustainable urban planning program. And the first question that I have to always come back to them is what is the value add? And what I mean by that is, this is a best practice that I strongly encourage and has guided me throughout my entire process between building the virtual crime scene and every project that I've worked on since then, is there true value in what we're building? Just because we have great technology and we have the capabilities and the capacity to build a virtual crime scene using VR, AR, or XR, anything in between, that doesn't mean that that is the most efficient and the most effective way for us to communicate that information. And so being able to thoroughly and fully understand the objectives and the outcomes that you're actually trying to get from these projects that you're building, that should be what dictates what projects you take on, and that they are meeting the value that you actually are trying to give to your students. So next slide, please. All right, so we've got the driving force behind this, and that we found something that has value. And so the reason that this came about and why I actually set forth to build this virtual crime scene was I was provided an opportunity to provide content to students that, as I mentioned, were in this hybrid format where we have face-to-face, we have online, and then we have this weird hybrid format student where they're kind of face-to-face, joining via our WebEx sessions, but they're also completing all their materials asynchronously without communicating with some of the other students in the class. And so as the primary instructional designer working on this program, I had a first row seat to be able to see the curriculum that these 3 buckets of students were having to work through, and that they were trying to all successfully navigate through this police and security studies program. And so my position allowed me to see the gaps in the curriculum that these students were experiencing, because our face-to-face students had the opportunity to learn about crime scene investigation and forensic science. But how do you teach those same skills to online students or students that are joining via the WebEx session, even though they can't physically be there? And so what I tried to come up with was a unique way and a truly unique opportunity for our students to have the same online virtual experience, to have firsthand opportunities to work with a crime scene and be able to be the first responding officer, be an officer that's coming to the scene after our crime scene technicians have visited the scene and marked up and bagged and tagged our different pieces of evidence, or we've gone to a gas station to collect security cam footage because we're trying to trace our suspect. Give these students, regardless of what level of technology understanding or whether they're face-to-face or online, giving them all an equal opportunity to experience the same unique learning and authentic learning opportunity that the other students in the class would have. And so that was one of my primary focuses as I was building this project, was giving these students this opportunity. And next slide, please. All right, so the reason everyone's here is you guys want to see the what. So as you know, I built a virtual reality crime scene, and I promise I'll show you pictures, and I promise you'll get to see a video and you'll get to see a walkthrough of the crime scene a little bit later on. But just to give you guys some perspectives of some of the decisions that went into making this hands-on experience, because the students, some of them are online and some of them are face-to-face, we couldn't build a crime scene and have the students come on and have do a field trip. So I wanted to build a virtual field trip where these students could come on, but more importantly, we created the entire narrative that set up this entire crime scene. So we didn't have to reference the O.J. Simpson trial. We don't have to reference the JonBenet Ramsey trial as an example for these students to use as a case study. So what we built was our own case study. But some of these strategic decisions that I made as we were going through that kind of shaped what was, which was this virtual crime scene, were like, we didn't use 360 video at all. And that was a very strategic decision because there are a lot of considerations that go in when you're using 360 video. Editing video and 360 video is not as easy to do because you can't cut from scene to scene as seamlessly if you're having your camera set up in one central location. There was also the considerations of how do we script this material and have an authentic experience? Are we going to recruit a police officer who's also really qualified to be an on-camera talent? Or do we hire an actor, we pay a student actor, or we actually hire a real actor to come in and portray our scene? What if they don't use the proper lingo or they overemphasize certain areas within our crime scene? So we made the strategic decision as we went through this to use exclusively 360 images instead of 360 video at all. And ultimately, I think in the end, that was really beneficial to us because it allowed us a lot more freedom and opportunity for post-production to enhance those photos, where had we used videos, we really had one take at it. Otherwise, we had to start that scene over and we couldn't really, stitch things together. One of the other things that kind of formed the what for this experience was the use of the virtual reality headsets, so such as Google Cardboard. We only built part of the crime scene, the very first initial part of the crime scene, to really be optimized to use in the actual Google Cardboard or any other VR viewing device, because we knew the population of students that were coming into this. And so we didn't want to require them to have a headset that they had to keep on to complete assignments and to go through this crime scene. And so our first initial crime scene that the students are dropped into is as the first responding officer. And so they can walk around the scene and experience it as a raw crime scene, as if they were the first person there. They find a victim laying on the ground with 2 gunshots. what do you do? And so we built that into one of the assessments in one of the courses that this virtual crime scene was used in. But the remainder of the content was optimized to be viewed on a laptop or on a desktop computer, but you still had the full virtual experience to navigate your way around. Now, when I say navigate your way around, this crime scene was set up to operate very similar to Google Street View. Now, what I mean by that is if you are going to Google Street View and you're down there, you can take whether your phone, your computer, your iPad, you look around, but then to move forward, you click on the arrow in the middle of the street. And instead of you feeling like you virtually are walking, you just kind of blur and you just magically appear at that new spot. So that's the same process that we used to create this virtual crime scene, was to have these spots around the scene where the students would have the ability to hop from position to position, but not truly move as if it's a video game, or that they had full control over their body to get this unique perspective to lay on the ground to try to look under the car, or climb on top of the car to try to look for something. We have fixed points throughout the crime scene that the students would be adhered to. And as I mentioned with our scene, we took on a rather large project with this, and we developed 3 different unique crime scenes and an interactive evidence table all at the same time. And so I'll touch on that with the scope of this project, but we did bite off a little bit more than I think that we realized that we could or could not chew at the time. Now, am I glad that we did all the work? Yes, because hindsight, we were able to get it done, and I think we put together a great product that we were all proud of. But at the time, and I'm obviously don't have hair to pull out, but I was pulling my hair out at the amount of material that stacked up in front of us, because we took a lot of images. So as we go through and you get to see the video demo in a little bit, just imagine every single thing that you see was an individual image that we had to capture. And it doesn't seem like a lot until you start counting up dozens and hundreds of photos. I never counted up how many we had, but I'm sure we had probably 2,000 or 3,000 photos when it was all said and done, because we would take duplicates of some photos to make sure that we got good ones, but then we would miss other photos along the way. So next slide, please. All right, so what you'll see here are actually a couple screenshots of the crime scene project, and you'll get to see this live in just a little bit, but just to give you a sense, so if you look on the right-hand side, this is my favorite image that I actually created for this entire project, and it's a map overview that allows the students to have this embedded directly into their Blackboard course, that they can jump from crime scene to crime scene or go over to the evidence table, but to have all the information presented to them in one spot. But more importantly, as an andragogical principle, when we were developing this, we wanted this to be as authentic as possible, but also to be relatable to the students so they could actually spatially see how far apart did our suspect and our victims meet each other before they went to the crime scene. Well, how far away was the apartment where they lived in relation to the gas station in our crime scene? Because those are things that as police officers and investigators, you would have to keep in mind and take into consideration. The image in the middle, which is the open trunk of that white car, that's our actual first virtual crime scene that the students will get to drop into. And you may see, it might be hard to see on the screen right now, but you can kind of see the yellow line hanging around the outside of the car. That's police tape. Now, that's a valuable lesson that I learned, because we forgot to hang crime scene tape up when we actually took these pictures. And so, as I reminded you, we had to take individual pictures for everything. So I had to Photoshop in crime scene tape, not just in that little piece, but virtually all the way around the whole crime scene for every single one of the pictures that we used for that. And I think there were 8 or 9 static images that we used for just that crime scene. So I had to Photoshop that in for every single one to make it look like it wrapped around trees and had a natural flow to it. So again, a valuable lesson learned, and I'll touch on those in a few moments. And then in the left-hand image, you'll see that's one of the examples of the evidence tables that we have. And using the ThingLink system, which I'll talk about in an upcoming slide, each of those yellow circles are interactive nodes that the students can hover over top of, get a preview of, and then they can click on and they can go in and they can interact with that evidence, and they can look at printouts of the close-ups of the shell casings or close-ups of the firearms that were used. They can get live feedback from the crime report that the crime technicians provided to us. And we can embed helpful videos and other multimedia materials that can enhance that learning opportunity for the students. So next slide, please. All right, so here's one thing that I think was hugely important for me as we were going through this project, was getting buy-in from my program. And I have to assume, although most of you have indicated that you're currently doing some of these projects at your institution, we have a poll question that we'll ask you in just a few moments, but this is something that is so critically helpful for people to understand, that buy-in for building a project like this does not happen overnight. There is a large amount of buy-in that I had to get from both the program director for this program, the instructors and the subject matter experts that were going to help me, but then also from my boss and the dean of our college to invest the money into buying a 360 camera, a nice 360 camera, and allowing us the opportunity to take a risk like this, because this was a big project that was not initially accepted by the program director in this program. And so I had to really fight to get this project to enhance the learning for the students. But for us to get the buy-in, we had to buy a really inexpensive 360 camera that ended up not working out for us in the end for our project here, just so we could build a demo virtual crime scene, or virtual car scene, I guess it just was, where we bought an inexpensive 360 camera, put it up on a tripod and set it around a car and took a bunch of pictures. And then I threw it into ThingLink and actually built a demo of what we meant when I said a virtual scene that allowed the user to navigate. Because every time I talked to the faculty member, the program director in our program about this, they just kept saying so it's like a video game. And I'm like, not really, because it's not a video game. You don't have full control. You can't move your character around. You can't select a new utensil to pick up a shell casing. You kind of just hop from spot to spot, and that's what we were calling virtual reality. And so once we built that demo, we had almost immediate buy-in, because they finally kind of put all the puzzle pieces together. And what my hope is that no one else has to go through that same program buy-in level of detail that we had to go into. And that an example like this that I'm sharing with everybody, and I'll continue to share with people, is that you can take an object like this back to your institution and show them and say, look, this guy from George Washington University showed me his demo that he built. We don't have to build something that big because he made a bunch of stupid mistakes and he took way too long building it. But we could build something smaller into a smaller scale. But here's the sample, and here's what they were able to accomplish in 4 months. Imagine what we could do in 2 months if we took all of his lessons learned and applied them and made all the right decisions at the very beginning. And so that's my hope for everyone here, is that you can take some of this information and share it back and be able to move forward and make great projects, just like what I think I was able to make. I don't know. I like it, but other people, I hope other people continue to like it. And then one of the other big pieces for the buy-in with our program director was tying it all together and being able to actually build this into the curriculum for the entire program. So initially when we built this, it was built to cover 2 classes within this bachelor's completion degree. But at this point now, it's currently expanded to either 6 or 7 of the classes that are in this 2-year program. And so that's a lot of the curriculum. These students are being exposed to this virtual crime scene. Now that it has evolved from what the original project was, but the core materials are still there. And as I mentioned earlier, this project was a massive undertaking, and we learned a lot of lessons, but going into it, some of the main scopes that we kind of set forward to make sure that we were going to be able to actually get this done was looking at building a timeline that was effective and that was realistic for what we were trying to do. And within those timelines that we struggled with a little bit, we're locking down things like our filming location. Because we were setting up a crime scene with whether it was a firearm or an outline of a body, we never used a real person because we didn't want to distract from the material we were presenting. But scheduling a location and having a police officer there as an escort so people didn't drive by and see us outlining a body on the ground and squirting fake blood all over a car that we didn't get police officers caught on us to a scene thinking that we were actually committing a crime or that we were tampering with the crime scene or anything like that. But then also just scheduling people that can come in and support you in this. And we were fortunate that we had people available to help us, but we had a heck of a time recruiting the program director, instructors, an actual police officer that was a student in the program, and then our videographer and myself to coordinate 5 people or 6 people to all be able to work together. And the other huge item, which I feel like ended up taking up a majority of my time for this, was actually writing the script for this. And Hester mentioned this at the beginning, is I wrote what I feel like is a very good crime novel just for this project, because we needed to have a realistic, authentic, and very, very believable and plausible crime scene that we could produce, that as the students went through, they didn't just point at one item on the screen and say, hey, there's the gun that committed the crime. We saw it in the other picture. We know that that's who it was. So we had to build a very unique and exploratory narrative that kept the students kind of guessing on what was actually going to happen next, but also tapping into real life curriculum decisions that these students have to go through and what is really available to them as police officers, such as street cameras that are on street corners, or technology such as ShotSpotter. How would that have been impacted when our suspect fired their gun? And if you don't know about ShotSpotter, that's not important to this narrative, but just know there's technology that police officers use that was very integral to this story. And so I needed to write a story that tied in with that real life technology that allowed me to write it without having the faculty members having to be the ones to write it, because they were not fully bought in at this point still. I was still kind of forcing this down their throat, saying, no, we want to do this, we want to do this, we want to engage the students. And then, as I mentioned before, building this into assignments and being conscientious of the decisions we made at the very beginning, that they were going to be available and they were going to work into the curriculum and into the students' assignments once we actually finally moved this into the courses and started implementing it and rolling it out to the students. And then the last thing, which I think is hugely important to most of the people that are interested in starting VR projects or XR projects as holistically, is that we found that this project was really affordable. This was not a financially expensive project to start. All in all, we spent less than $550 to build this project from start to finish. Now, we did have some resources already available to us, such as an instructional designer like myself. We had a videographer on staff. We already owned a really nice DSLR, which is just a point and shoot camera. And we also had a video studio and a recording space where we could record video and audio as needed. We also had subject matter experts at our disposal. But this is all to say, getting the buy-in and being able to plan these things out beforehand was hugely important for us to be able to move this project forward and be able to move forward effectively. So I'm interested in, and I know Hester has a poll question for this now that we can go to, is how have you all been able to get buy-in from your administrators, from faculty members, or even you're getting your students to buy into the technology that you're using?
Great, okay, I'm now launching the next poll. And the question is, do you struggle to gain buy-in for XR initiatives in your organization? 70-30, that's not bad.
Yeah, and that's great to see that people are predominantly people are not struggling with buy-in. And I hope for those folks that are struggling with buy-in that you're able to use my example here as a case study that you can turn around and you can share with people. Now, as I mentioned, and Hester, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. And Pamela, I'll get to your question right after I finish this next little point, and then I'll answer your question for you. So,
oh, sorry, I just wanted to take a peek at the chat here. Let's see. Okay, great. So you're going to respond to this as part of your slides, Cody?
Yep.
Awesome, great. Okay, let me get back to the slides then. Thanks. And thanks for the questions in the chat. Please go ahead and keep adding those.
Thank you very much. Right, and so as I mentioned, when we built this project, it cost us roughly $550, give or take a couple dollars and some change on each side. At this moment in time, the technology that we use, which was Kodak PixPro Orbit 360 4K camera, you can buy that camera for less than $300 now. 2 years ago, when we bought our camera, I think we paid $500 for it. So the quality that the pictures that camera produced for us were really good. They probably could have been better. And there is technology out there that has improved greatly since we built our project. And if we were to go back and kind of retrofit and update some of that material, and we got a new camera that took 4K and also we kind of optimized everything to the best of our ability, we would be able to make this project for probably $500 again, and it would be even better. So today, if you wanted to build this project and use the same camera that we use and use the ThingLink Premium Classroom version that we also use, you could produce this project for less than $350. Roughly, it would be about $330 if you wanted to produce something like this today. Now, we had to use the ThingLink Premium version because there are certain features within the ThingLink platform, and you'll get to see that live or get to see the video of it in just a few seconds or a few moments. But there are a few features of the ThingLink Premium Classroom version that you have to pay for that allow you to add in more of the interactive nodes that allow the students to click on a spot and then jump over to a different location and then have different nodes that pop up and have interactivity built into them. But even then, there is a free version of ThingLink, and I'll touch on that a little bit later about getting in and using the platform. But the other thing that I put in my notes is that were priceless was the subject matter experts. And this kind of goes to the value add question that I mentioned at the very beginning. Is we had 2 adjunct faculty members that work in our program, and our program that I supported was entirely adjunct faculty members that I worked with throughout this entire process. We also had the program director, who is a retired law enforcement member, and one of the students in the program who assisted us with securing our filming location is a U.S. Park police officer. So we had 4 people in law enforcement that were our subject matter experts, but that we also had at our disposal without having to pay additional expenses on. We also already had a full-time videographer on our staff who was highly qualified to take pictures and to do video. Now, we didn't have experience using 360 video at all. Neither myself nor Drew, our videographer. So that was a learning experience that we had. But to touch on Pamela's question that she posed just a moment ago, and then I'll answer this other one, yes, I did work with our faculty members during the development and the planning process because I wasn't the subject matter expert. I was just an instructional designer. So I understood the pedagogy and the andragogy that went into when we build this assignment, how are we going to tie that to our objectives? But for example, when we were filming the actual crime scene, and this is a funny anecdote that I'll share with folks outside of this even, was Drew and I got to the crime scene and we pulled out the fake blood that we were going to use for the crime scene. And we take it out. It was from a Halloween store. And we just start squirting it all over the hood of the car. We're spraying it on the side of the window. We sprayed a bunch on the ground. And the police officer that was the student, he got out of his cruiser and he walked over and he says, "How many victims do you guys have for your crime scene?" We're like, "Oh, we just have one." He's like, "You guys have enough blood here for like 8 people. And so we didn't know that because we're not law enforcement experts. We're not subject matter experts. And so then we had to clean the car off. We're like wiping it off with paper towels. And we said, okay, well, show us how much blood should go on here. And it was a fraction of the amount. But we had to work with these faculty members and these subject matter experts to make sure that we were meeting all the authenticity that would make it meaningful for the students, and having them involved with writing the narrative for the crime scene to make sure that it was realistic and authentic and that the students would believe it. Because if the students didn't believe it, they're not going to be invested in it and they're going to discount it immediately as just some hokey gimmick that they had to do for class. And then as far as paying the adjuncts, we did pay the adjuncts that assisted us with this program. But what we wanted to do was we waited until we we were a majority of the way through the material, so we could figure out how much work they'd actually invested into us. We had discussed the payment amount once we went into it, and it wasn't until afterwards that we finally were able to authorize that payment to them. But being able to pay them ensured that we had their attention and that they were actually going to give us meaningful assistance instead of just trying to get them to pro bono help us out with this project. Even though they were very much interested and invested in doing this project, we still wanted to dangle the carrot out in front of them to make sure that they were going to help us and see the project through as far as we needed for them. So I hope that answered your questions there, Pamela. And then Hester, I'll go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so where did we go? Because this was very much a brainchild of mine that I kind of came up with and came to the program director and said, I want to do this. We need to do this for your program. And it evolved as we went along. But what it ended up being for us was a fully immersive story and a hands-on experience for these students to go through, because we gave them the opportunity to do something that they would not have been able to do as an online or in our weird hybrid format that these students were enrolled in. Even for our face-to-face students, it would not have had the same authenticity and same experience had we told them, hey, we're going to have a field trip set up for you to come do this, even though we're going to then have a webcam and we're going to show our online students what you're doing, because that would not have been fair to those students. And so it gave us a chance to build this cohesive crime scene that was so intertwined and so built into the fiber of all these courses that as the instructional designer helping design all the courses going through this program, I saw what the objectives and what the learning outcomes were going to be for each of these courses. And so I was able to add in little Easter eggs and little pieces of evidence and pieces of equipment and items throughout the crime scene that I knew we could tie into other classes. And that's how this crime scene project went from being originally designed for 2 classes to now being involved in like 6 or 7 of the classes, because there's so many different pieces of evidence and so many different pieces of narrative that we baked into the crime scene that we can then go out and write new narratives. So for example, in one of our classes, which is our interrogation class and our relations class, we took one of our 2 suspects for our crime scene, and we manipulated his character and made him into a serial killer. And so the students in this class get to do an interview with our suspect as a serial killer. And so that project turned into a choose your own narrative or choose your own story, where our students get to go through, they get to hear the reaction from our suspect, they then get to choose what question they want to ask. But what was so unique and so great about this is that those students then now put a face and a name to our suspect and actually can then relate all that material together. So then in another later class, they start to look at other crimes that have similar MOs, and they start to notice a familiar name because they've learned about it through their interview with the serial killer. And so those are those real little teeny breadcrumbs and Easter eggs that I was able to build in because I was working so closely with the faculty members in writing out this narrative. And so we'll go ahead and go to the last slide before we get to the video. So here's the meat and the potatoes of my presentation. Anytime I talk to people, because doing this project, there was so much wasted time. And I mean that in the most blunt way possible, because I was working with my colleague, Drew Santarillo, who's our videographer, and he and I had never done a project like this. We had done video production, we'd done video lectures together, but we'd never filmed something that was so advanced and had so many moving pieces. And one of our valuable lessons was not the financial cost, but the time, energy, money paradigm, because we spent so much time and wasted money working over top of each other and moving in opposite directions or overlapping with each other on projects. And some of that goes into that pre and post-production issues, because when we were going through, when we were doing pre-production and we were storyboarding and we were making shot lists, we neglected to think about how are we going to save all of these materials? What naming conventions are we going to use when we're going through all of this material? And so afterwards, we're going through and we're editing photos and we're uploading them onto Google Drive, and we have what at that point a nomenclature that we were comfortable with, but all of a sudden we hadn't worked out what our workflow was going to be and figured out, hey, when I'm working on this scene, you only work on this scene, because there was one instance where we were both working on the exact same image at the same time. We both uploaded them to Drive at almost the same time and realized that our files had overridden each other. Now, fortunately in Drive, you can access your materials and you can go back, but we both had different files of the exact same image on our computer, and it was just a lot of wasted time and energy when we were going through that. And the other one that I wish we would have thought about more when we were sitting down to originally design the material were, how were the students going to interact with it? Because there's this assumption that because you're doing virtual reality, everything needs to be on a headset that the students can put on, or that they can use their hands and they can interact with the material and that they can move things. So when we first started, we started designing this scene that everything was going to be built out for the students, that they were going to be able to use their mobile devices. And it wasn't until I actually started talking to some of the students right before we started building everything out in ThingLink that many of them started to express some concerns about everything being on their headset, because they've either done it before or they weren't comfortable with using that. And so that was one of those lessons that we would have designed things differently from the original sit-down meeting had we made the assumption and made the knowledge check at the beginning that these materials should be fully embedded in Blackboard and that the students should be able to click and interact with things, rather than forcing all users to use a headset of some sort on their smartphone or on a tablet. But also then making the assumption that every adult learner has a smartphone that they want to use for this class project. And so that was one of those valuable things. And then the last item was accessibility. We didn't know the full breadth and depth of accessibility and how we were going to fully address that when we first started this project. And it's something that we're still struggling with. Even though this project hasn't had a lot of work done to it in the last few months, because I've transitioned away a little bit from working with all of these courses, like making sure that we have audio or we have transcripts for all of our virtual reality scenes with descriptions for students with hearing impairment or visual impairment, so they can have the same experience and read through, or having every image that we took that the students are being presented with made available for students that would like extra time to be able to view them and to access those. And one of the other things that we built in, which was part of the immersive experience, was we have an audio soundscape that the students have. So as you're going through and you go to different spaces, your audio changes. But that was one of those accessibility things that we weren't sure how we could actually communicate that to students for them to understand that the audio was different slightly, but we had to make sure that that material wasn't imperative for the outcome of the assignment or of the course that would impact the students by not being able to hear, not being able to visually see something within the crime scene. And so now we'll move on to the next slide, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a narrated experience.
You know what? Sorry to interrupt you, Cody, but we have, I think, 4 questions waiting in the chat. So I just wanted to jump into a couple of those since we have 15 minutes left. And if we can get to some of the questions, then we can jump back and show the video. So we answer a couple of the questions here. I think that we have another question from Pamela here.
Okay.
So the question is, were the interviews for fully online students or in-person/live video?
I'm not sure what interview she is referencing.
The interview with the suspect, perhaps. And Pamela, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that they had this opportunity to interview one of the suspects. Is that correct, as part of the experience?
And just to answer,
the serial killers.
yeah. So for that interview with the serial killer that we built for the students, that was an entirely asynchronous, if this then that project that we built. So we could have used Captivate, but we actually used Camtasia for that, to where the students would select whatever question they wanted to ask next. It would then take them to another branch in the story, and then we built the face of the suspect to change, so his body language would change depending on whether he was getting irritated, whether he was being indulged, whether he was excited, whether he was bored. And so the faculty member helped a lot with us being able to design that narrative and write that that if this then that branching scenario. So it was entirely asynchronous. There was no actual person associated with it, and we made it to where it looked kind of like a cartoon, or more like a comic book effect. So it stripped out a little bit of the realism, but didn't make it cartoonish where it didn't seem authentic at all.
That's great. Thank you for that. And thanks, Pamela, for jumping in and clarifying the interview that we're talking about. So we have a question now from Somya asking or saying, accessibility has been a key aspect, especially in the education field. How was this addressed on this? You did talk a little bit about accessibility. And before I let you jump in and talk a little bit more, she also asks if you will have access to the PowerPoint. And yes, we will not only share the PowerPoint with you, we will also share a full archive of this webinar on our website at xrandlearning.com/webinars. But I will let you answer that question about accessibility, whether there's anything else you wanted to add there, Cody, and we'll jump back into the slides.
The only thing that I'd like to add about accessibility is that I would like for us to go back through the project and start at the very beginning of the finished project that we have and work with our disability services and our accommodations to make sure that we are effectively and efficiently doing everything that we can to meet those needs of students through an accessibility lens, because we tried to adapt information as we went through, because we didn't fully make every single accessibility consideration at the beginning. So we kind of had to go back and retrofit certain aspects of it. And unfortunately, there are certain parts of the 360 and the VR and the XR realm which are not fully accessible at this moment in time. And I know that that's something that everybody thinks about. So I wanted to make sure that I mentioned it and just know that I know that there are gaps in the material that we did. I know that there are, and I want to go back through and make sure that we can plug all of those in and that we can meet every student's need, because I want this to be universally acceptable and accessible for all students.
Yeah, let me just jump in with one thing. I actually attended a very interesting event last month in New York City, co-hosted by Verizon Media and by Cornell Tech. So this was all about accessibility in XR and how we can encourage the industry to build XR accessibly from the ground up. So there's definitely a lot of interesting work happening in this area. And if you go to xraccess.org, you can find out more about that. I just wanted to jump in and say that. And now we can move to the video. Shall I go ahead and press play?
Yep. Yeah, so I'm going to just do an audio narration of this. If you could go to full screen with that, Hester, before it starts playing. There we go. All right, can you pause that really quick, Hester, just so I can touch on this just for a second? Just keep your cursor there. Yeah. So here you can see this was an embedded map overview that I was talking about earlier in the webinar. And so each one of those little yellow flags, which are like evidence markers, indicate to our students where our different crime scenes were taking place. And so again, this was so integral to this assignment because I wanted students to spatially be able to see, conceptually and spatially, how close together and how far away some of these different events that were occurring. And also for anybody out there who has a keen eye for geography, this is a part of Washington, D.C., and that over on the left-hand side where crime scene number 1 is actually Rock Creek Park, and that's where we've actually filmed our crime scene number 1. And so that's actually 100% accurate where our crime actually occurred. So you can go ahead and hit play again. Thank you. So yeah, so this was really exciting to design because it gave the students an experience, but what we did was we embedded this directly into Blackboard so the students could come in and they could move around and they could have free access to jump around to any of the scenes. And so you're going to see a little bit of the interactivity of ThingLink here. So as the students come in, now this is our process crime scene. So you'll notice the crime scene tape around the outside of the edge. And through ThingLink, I was able to drop in these little white nodes. And so what the students do, and again, this operates similar to Google Street View, is to jump around to these different locations where I've implanted these images. So now the students are right next to the car, they're looking around. So here's one of the nodes the students can click on and they can see one of the shell casings. And so this is all part of that authentic experience, we use real shell casings. That's actually my body on the ground that we traced. We didn't use a real body, as I mentioned, but the students can go around and they can look at these different pieces of evidence that have been processed. And so I know there's a little bit of a cartoony feel to it because we keep the students on the rails of telling them where they can go and what they can see. But that was one of the limitations within ThingLink. But as you can see, the students can move all the way around this crime scene. And we allowed them to go inside the car even, and they can go all the way around the car. But for this demo reel, I just did a really quick screen capture, just so you can see how much freedom the students have to go around and look and experience the different scenes. So now as a student, we would pop back to the main map, and now we can go on to crime scene number 2, which here is an example of one of our security cameras that we staged to make it look like where our suspect and our victims actually meet. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a black car, black Ford Explorer rolling into the picture. This is our suspect. So the students then can go through and look at these different pieces, these different angles of the security camera footage to see where did our suspect, where did our victim meet? What time did it happen? They can also go back, and we have interviews here. So this is an interview with a witness of them talking through. And so this is crime scene number 3, which is the apartment where our suspects live. And so as a student, you can come in and you can navigate around and see the different pieces of evidence that were left at this scene. And then all these pieces of evidence were then taken back. Now I cut through on this demo through the apartment, but there's nodes throughout the entire apartment that you can go through and interact. And so you can see this was a drug-related crime and a drug-related issue that was taking place. So here's our evidence table. So as I was saying, you can come in, the students can see the evidence table, they can look at these images up close to see closer images of these different pieces of evidence. Here's our crime file, which goes through the detailed list that the technician gave us. And then here's an example in ThingLink where we had an embedded video that explains how do you tie guns to criminals. And so this is all really important and relevant to showing the students how shell casings are used. And so that was my little quick walkthrough of the virtual crime scene. And I'll say this now, I'm happy to talk to anybody else that wants to talk about this more, that wants to see some more demos and things like that, because there was a lot of material that went into this and it was a lot of work, but at the same time, I want people to be able to use this and move this narrative forward and to create better virtual crime scenes that are better than mine and continue the narrative and give students great and unique learning opportunities. And that is my thing.
I do want to thank everyone for attending, and I have just a couple of closing slides that I wanted to put in front of you. Oop, hold on just a second. Oh, okay, great. A few more slides as we close here. I wanted to remind folks who are in the Boston area that on October the 28th, we have our Global Summit at Boston University. This is a day-long event, and we're going to be covering all of the stages of the XR adoption cycle. So please visit our website to learn more about that. And we also have a LinkedIn group to continue the conversation. So we'd love to have you just search for XR and Learning on LinkedIn. We have a company page and we have a group. We would love to continue the conversation there. So thank you so much, Cody, for coming today and for sharing your story. This was a really exciting one to hear, and I actually think that the narrated video was a really wonderful way for people to get a real feeling for what your students are experiencing at George Washington University.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And like Esther said, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to pass those along. I'm happy to keep talking.
All right, thank you. Thanks everyone for attending, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Bye now.
Bye.